So welcome everybody. So today we have one of my favorite topics, journaling to support recovery. Probably my number one go-to with a lot of things. Actually, sleep, it's probably my number one go-to for people who have sleeping issues. So I just love this. So Amy is back with us from the University of Minnesota School of Social Work. So we'll let her introduce herself a little bit more here in a second. Calendar of upcoming echoes. Next week, we will not have one. And then you can kind of see the next couple of months, a lot of variety here, a lot of topics, just a lot of excitement. Be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think one of the good ones coming back too. We got Isaac Mrazlik coming back again, Marsalek coming back, and central sensitization is something that he really is really big into. So I that's one you really don't want to miss as well. So,
right. And I think that one, I want to highlight also, sorry, Kurt, the one on June 7th. This was one that we have been working on with DHS when it comes to post-acute pain and prescribing. And so it really kind of gets down into the newer CDC guidelines, as well as kind of the overlap with what Minnesota recommends as far as guidelines. So that will be a good one. And yeah.
All right. And remember, there's free CME. If there's somebody else in your room that wants the CME, please make sure that you let them, let Katie know that they're also in the room so that they get that. Please feel free to turn on your video. Everybody likes to see your face, as does Amy when she's talking.
Right. So if anyone needs any kind of technical support of any kind, help with any patient cases or really just anything, that's how you can get a hold of us. Erin, our nurse, who is unfortunately out sick today, but you can email her or call any of us for some assistance. And the core site. So the manual, by tomorrow, I think we'll have a better idea of the dating and timing of this, but it is very, very soon for real this time.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, the Addiction Podcast, I can't remember what the last one was, but feel free to check out that website. Lots of good topics.
All right. So with that, I'm going to take my slides down. Amy, we'll let you put yours up. And if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more, by all means, feel free, please.
Thank you very much. Let me take a moment to share my screen and then launch the slides.
Perfect. And remember, people, if you have questions or, when Amy is talking, please, if you want to unmute or just chat in the questions, and then Kurt and I can help facilitate those at the end.
Thank you very much. Yes, please feel free to interrupt with questions. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm very happy to be here this afternoon to talk about an intervention I've been developing that's designed to reinforce and strengthen recovery from addiction. And it makes you feel much better about life is an actual quote from one of my research participants. A little bit more about me. As mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota School of Social Work, and my research focus is addiction recovery. So I've studied things like gratitude, forgiveness, what I'll talk about today, journaling, sober living houses, 12-step programs, recovery in small towns and rural communities. And I teach, sometimes teach the addiction class and give talks in the community about my research. I just wanted to say that we stand on the traditional homelands of the Dakota people, land on which the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and the School of Social Work was built and remains. And I want to start with a note of gratitude for my collaborators, research assistants over the years, the treatment facilities that allow me to step into their workplaces and conduct a research study. They entrust me with that awesome responsibility, and I'm super grateful for those great experiences. And thanks also to the funders who give me money to run my research studies. Now, I had presented on this journaling technique 2 years ago at this Echo, and I just wondered if any of you here today recall being there 2 years ago. So if you don't mind, there is a little poll that's been presented. If you don't mind answering the poll.
Now, clearly, Amy, you can't tell who can't remember and who can remember, just in case, there's some of us that at certain ages may not be able to remember things We obviously don't want you to know that, I guess.
I can completely understand and empathize with that predicament entirely. So, okay, it looks like most in the audience were not here 2 years ago. That's great. And a lot has changed, but I will be reviewing the study I presented then with more finalized results, and then the new study, the results of the new study. So
Try this.
good to know that. So I'd just like to start by pausing and considering, what is journaling? You know, as far as your own personal experience, your own conceptualization of what journaling is, I think most of us would say that when we think of journaling, we think of opening a blank notebook and kind of pouring out our thoughts and feelings, sort of a free writing exercise. So a few more poll questions for you now. We'll go more in depth about journaling, research on journaling, and this new technique I've been working on. I have had a regular journaling practice. Oh, I have a regular journaling practice now. Who would say you have a regular journaling practice now? I think we have 3 questions in a row here. Okay, 12% say yes. Oops. Okay, here comes the next poll questions. I have had a regular journaling practice in the past, yes or no? Okay, 28% have said yes. Which of these journaling approaches have you heard of before? Okay, gratitude journaling is the most popular, well-known form of journaling that people have heard of. Okay, let's go ahead with the next poll as well, if you don't mind, like the next 2. Have you ever recommended journaling to a client? Okay, 67% say yes, and for a fair amount, it's not applicable. And then the last question, or the next question in the list, and then that'll be it for polls for now. If I've recommended journaling to a client, I taught them how or recommended a specific approach. We should have had a not applicable there as well. Okay, all right, with 39% saying yes. One question that guides my research currently is, we can tell a client or even a friend or a family member, we can recommend that they journal about something. Like we can say to them, I recommend you journal about that, or go ahead and journal about that. They'll probably know what we mean, and they'll probably have a successful experience, and they'll get some benefit. Similarly, if we say to such people, go ahead and write a gratitude list. I think that would help you right now. Take out a notebook and write down things you're grateful for. They probably know what we meant by that. They'd probably be able to do it, and they'd probably get some benefit. But one area of research I have, and an interesting question that I think about a lot, is how can we present those ideas with a little more structure, guidance, instructions, maybe some modeling, some examples, so that the person we make the recommendation to can get even more benefit out of it. And that in part leads or guides what I have to say to you today. So as you may be aware, there's something called bullet journaling. I feel that journaling is really quite popular now. If you go to Barnes and Noble, there's a lot of different kinds of journals on the bookshelf. One very popular approach is bullet journaling, which is kind of a productivity method, but also a self-expression method. You might have heard of the Monk Manual or seen it advertised on Facebook. The Monk Manual is a personal accountability or like a to-do list, but also with some gratitude components. So it kind of combines action items with processing emotions, which my journal that I'll be presenting to you does both of these things as well. You might have heard of Morning Pages by the author Julia Cameron, who recommends that when you get up in the morning, write for 3 pages without stopping, and that will enhance creativity. And even very recently, Oprah has come out with the Life You Want Planner, which is kind of what I would call a guided journal, a journal with prompts in it, not a blank journal, but a journal with written prompts that tell people or coach people on what to write. Okay, here's those polls that we already did. So I personally try out a lot of different journaling techniques out there on the market, and I use the journaling practice that I developed myself. So I have the good fortune of really plunging in and trying a lot of different journaling practices. And I feel that all forms of journaling have some similar components. First of all, there's an element or an aspect of privacy. There's this sense that no one else is going to see what I write and that this is for me alone. And that can be kind of freeing. Maybe frees us up to say things or express things that we might not express to others. There's definitely an aspect of self-expression. I'm going to be letting out some emotions in writing. There's this idea of insight that by way of taking pen to paper and expressing myself, pouring out my emotions, I might learn something new about myself that'll be useful. And finally, this aspect that I've added number 4, this aspect recently, this sense of my true self, that who I really am can freely come out on the journaling pages. Not the person I am when I'm trying to be this person for that group or this person for that person, but who I really am, my true and authentic self can come out. And this idea can support early recovery as people are finding their sober identity and really figuring out, maybe for the first time, who they truly are as people. So I was motivated to create a journaling practice specifically to support addiction recovery. I wanted to leverage these aspects of journaling, self-expression, privacy, and so forth, and tailor them so they specifically support recovery and so that they have a positive orientation. Sometimes when we think of journaling, for some of us, we think of pouring out negative emotion, and there is research evidence that is helpful for good health and it reduces stress. But I wanted the journal to be prompt people so that there's an expression more of positive aspects of life now in recovery, so that recovery will be reinforced. So the journaling practice I'm going to be presenting to you today is called Positive Recovery Journaling, and it was built on a foundation of existing research that I'll tell you about real quick. There's an existing body of research called behavioral activation, and that involves planning and enacting rewarding activities that flow from personal values. So you sit down with the client and you have them talk about what's most meaningful to them in life and about what they find rewarding and important in life now. And you help them to include more of those aspects of their daily life. You help them to include more activities that are important and meaningful to them as a way in a cognitive behavioral therapy. It has a cognitive behavioral therapy foundation. If the person enacts some of those more positive behaviors, they might start feeling better. And there's an evidence base that behavioral activation is supportive of addiction recovery. The other baseline type of research that supported my development of this journaling practice that I'll be showing you shortly is a foundation of positive psychology. Positive psychology is a scientific study of what makes people flourish, what makes people happy. They developed a set of interventions that are designed to lift up a person's mood. And we know that people in early recovery from substance use disorders are really beset with negative emotion. They can feel a lot of shame over their previous addictive behavior. They can be suffering the consequences of their previous addictive behavior. And even the brain science shows that positive emotion is suppressed and stress reactivity is amplified in those early months or maybe the first year of recovery. So they really have a lot of negativity, can have a lot of negative emotion. So I really wanted this journal to help address that and help people to turn their attention and focus on what's going well, what's going right now in recovery. And there is some preliminary work on positive psychology in the addictions. Both behavioral activation and positive psychology have written exercises involved in them. So involving both in a journaling practice seems to make sense. There's also a research evidence base, as I mentioned briefly, on journaling. And most of that research is about what they call expressive writing. This involves an instruction in the research where the researcher asks the person in the study to sit down and write about the most traumatic experience in their life every day for 15 to 20 minutes for 3 to 5 consecutive days. So it's really an invitation to pour out that extremely stressful material from the person's history. And results show that getting that material expressed reduces a sense of inner stress, and that there's some benefit to physical health from that practice. But again, the emphasis is quite a bit on negative content. There's also a smaller body of literature on something called interactive journaling, where the person gets, and this has been involved in addictions and criminal justice groups, where the person gets a little bit of didactic information about blood alcohol content, for example, on this example on the slide, and then they answer some questions where they write directly into the booklet, responding to what they just learned and answering about their own experience. So there's little research on this, that this kind of a practice can help people become ready or motivated for treatment. So expressive writing has focused mostly on negative events. What about a journaling practice that focuses on what's going right with recovery? Interactive journaling has focused primarily on the initiation of behavior change. What about a journaling practice that focuses on the maintenance of behavior that already changed? So the maintenance of recovery rather than the initiation of recovery. Positive psychology and behavioral activation have shown benefit for people with addictions. What would happen if we combined them? So here's my introduction to positive recovery journaling. It's an open, what they call in publishing, an open page spread. The spine down the middle represents the present moment. On the left-hand side of the page, the person reviews the past 24 hours. And on the right-hand side of the page, the person plans the upcoming 24 hours. So on the left-hand side, we have some aspects of positive psychology and emotional self-expression. On the right-hand side, we have some aspects of behavioral activation and activity planning. People are asked to write a bullet-pointed list of all the good things that happened over the past day. So they're asked to stop and reflect back over the past day and make a list of every good thing they could possibly think of that happened in the past day. And one of the most popular items from my research was that people would write, "I woke up sober." So we give them lots of examples. We model for them what to put, and they very readily can write 6 to 8 items by the time there's a group process involved, by the time we have them completely work through this exercise. Then there's another gratitude exercise, things that I am grateful for. This is the more traditional gratitude list. And again, people make a bullet pointed list of things they're grateful for now. And again, we give them lots of instruction, support, modeling, and examples, and they're able to produce a very long list, like 8 to 10 items. Bad things that happened, we include that so that the journaling practice resembles and reflects real life, real human life, that it isn't kind of a saccharine sweet or rose-colored glasses kind of approach. Bad things happen to all of us every day, hopefully not that bad, but to have a place to express it and get it out there can be useful for a lot of reasons. One reason might be that it could signal to the person that they need to reach out for help. If a bad thing recurs day after day, that might be very important information. And just as a way to express themselves and get it out of their hearts and onto the page. An unintended consequence that was pretty interesting of the good things and the bad things is that people in the research have told us repeatedly that they were surprised to find that the good things list was typically much longer than their bad things list. They fully expected that their bad things list would be longer than their good things, but they couldn't argue with the evidence written in their own handwriting. And they would say, I was surprised by how much good is happening. I was surprised by how much there is to be grateful for. There's also an exercise here, good wishes for others. For this bullet pointed list, I tell people, this is the place where I stop thinking about myself for a change, and I think about other people, to make a list of other people we know who could benefit from our good wishes for them today. People who are suffering, people who are worried, people who just had surgery, people who just got bad news, things we hear about in the media, and make a list of people to whom we're willing to send good wishes out. That's an act of kindness exercise, and that's from positive psychology. The right-hand side of the page is meant to be an invitation for the person to plan their upcoming day, first of all, to make a plan, a written plan for the day, and also a plan that is balanced. So it's not a list of only grueling, sort of like difficult tasks, but also includes some pleasure and recreation as a plan so that they start to enjoy recovery. And also that what will they do in the coming day to actively support their recovery? So their recovery is built into the plan. Spirituality, community, social. I used to call it financial, and then I got feedback from people in my research that word caused them anxiety. So I'm going to use the word abundance instead from now on. And so means basically the same thing, but it could mean, deposit that check that came in the mail, as well as maybe pay the bill or do your taxes. Amends and repair, mostly as a carry forward from 12-step programs, but most of the people in my research study have told me they're not ready to do amends and repair yet, but they could look at their bad things list for ideas for what to put under amends and repair. And under their good wishes for others, I invite people in the research to choose one of the people they listed and write their name under social on the right-hand side. And then in the coming 24 hours, reach out to that person and say, how are you? I remember that you had surgery. How are you feeling today? So that people can maybe start to strengthen their interpersonal networks in that way. And also to help people feel like good and thoughtful people. So I want to be silent for just a minute and let you read this composite entry of a positive recovery journaling page. The number of bullets you see represent the average number of bullets, and every single entry was written by a real research participant, but this is my handwriting and it's a composite. I'll just be quiet for a couple seconds so you can read the example. There's an aspect of positive recovery journaling that I added, which is informed by behavioral activation. And that is that I've been teaching positive recovery journaling in my research studies over a period of 8 sessions, 8 one-hour sessions. And in each session, I teach a different aspect of the journaling, and it builds on itself. And there's one point in the 8 sessions when I have people choose a category on the right-hand page that means the most to them right now in this current moment. And then we dive a little bit deeply into that category heading. So if someone chose recovery from the right-hand page, they would answer these questions that you see as it relates to recovery. And they write, if you will, a little essay. And really, I've had universally, everyone has been successful in being able to do this task. Then what they do in the lower right-hand corner is they write 1, 2, 3, or 4 action items that they could do, an activity or an action that they could take to align their lives in accordance with this vision that they've just written about. This is their vision, their sense of what's most important to them in that life area. And what's an action item they could take? What's an action they could take so that their life turns into this vision? So we have them write some ideas. Then we teach them how to basically write them as SMART goals and as goals that could be accomplished in the next 24 hours. So hopefully that skill is reinforced and they can use that on the right-hand side of the page of the journal going forward. So now I'll tell you about 2 studies I've conducted on positive recovery journaling, where I've recruited participants, I've taught them the journaling in the 8 sessions, and then I've recorded some of the impact of the journaling on their experience. So on the left-hand side, the first study I did was all women in residential treatment, 15 women. There was no control group. So all 15 women learned the journaling. This was before COVID. It was in person at a residential treatment center. And my second study was a randomized control trial. So we had a treatment group and a control group. It was conducted during COVID, during the height of COVID. So it was all remote over Zoom. And it was from people of all gender identities who were in residential or intensive outpatient. In terms of the sample characteristics, just to point out some major differences, the second study, people had a longer average length of sobriety at the baseline. So people were in a much earlier phase of recovery in the women's only study. And basically the ethnic and racial profile matched that of the treatment center host. Our first study has now been published, and it was this was the design of the study. Participants met me, they were in the group with me, and then they journaled on their own for 2 weeks, and then we had a final evaluation. People found the journaling relatively easy, satisfying, pleasant, helpful, and they put in a fair amount of effort, and they found it not very difficult. So the factors you see in red, we saw positive change in those factors over that month that the people were journaling. And that doesn't say that the journaling caused these positive changes, because they were in therapy and they were having a lot of other treatment as well, but no one got worse. So we see this as a positive sign. And again, people felt that more good things than bad things were happening. They were, there was more to be grateful for than they thought. And in the context of all this good stuff, they told us that their list of bad things stopped feeling so menacing to them. It felt like learning experiences. It didn't feel so threatening. So this sort of got downgraded in terms of its level of emotional impact. People enjoyed the right-hand side of the page. For the women in this study, they saw value in just writing down what they had to do. And then when they did it, they remembered to take steps that were important to them. And then when they successfully remembered to make a doctor's appointment or to take their vitamins, they felt really, really good about themselves. So they just needed to use it as a basic planner, and they found use in that. There were some critiques. Some said they found that their responses were repetitive, maybe because they were in a residential setting. They said they were not, many said they were not yet ready to make repair or amends. They would get busy and then they'd forget to do the journaling, or they'd be too busy and then they felt bad about forgetting to do it. So it had an unintended negative impact sometimes. And one person said she just wanted to write more in depth. She wanted to do more than just bullet points. And now my second study, I have my eye on the time here. It's a randomized control trial, and the design was very similar to the first study. People met and were screened by us, and then they were randomized either to be in what we call the maroon group. They got mailed a journal right away. They did the group with me on Zoom. They journaled on their own for 2 weeks, and then we did some follow-up work. People could also be randomized to the control group. They filled out electronic questionnaires so that we could compare the answers to the treatment group. And they did that for a whole month. And then we had some follow-up. Now, one interesting thing to tell you is that these questionnaires asked about so many positive aspects of recovery that the control group told us in the exit interviews that they actually felt benefit from filling out the questionnaires. And so you don't want to have that happen in a randomized control trial. You want the control group to have a neutral experience. But in some ways, we accidentally found that the surveys alone had some therapeutic benefit. So there's potential then to develop that into its own treatment. But it might have had an effect on whether we see any impact of the journaling. So one question we ask always with a new pilot or a brand new intervention is it feasible? Can people do it? Are people able to do it? Is it easy enough for them? So first of all, journaling was of tremendous interest to the people who we recruited, and people stepped forward with a lot of interest in learning journaling, a new journaling practice. So 94% of those who met criteria for the study agreed to enroll in the study. Participants attended an average of 5 of the 8 groups. 60% of the sample attended 6 or more of the groups, and 42 participants in the treatment group completed 584 journal entries. And again, like last time, there were about 40 bullet points on average per journaling page. Here we see some interesting effects of the journaling, that same scale of feasibility and acceptability. Blue is the treatment group and orange is the control group. So both groups put in almost equivalent amount of effort. Both found their work to be equally easy, not very difficult. So the journaling was not perceived as more difficult than just filling out questionnaires. But in terms of this more salient impact, the journaling was significantly more satisfying, pleasant, and helpful than the just filling out the surveys, even though people told us they liked doing the surveys and they found the surveys helpful. So is Positive Recovery Journal, what was its impact on well-being? So here I'm going to show you from baseline to this 1 month period. And I'll show you some follow-up data as well. Basically, our findings were mixed. We found that there were no differences between the treatment and control groups on this column of outcomes on the far left of the slide. In the middle of the slide, we found that for 3 of our outcomes, the control group did better than the journaling group. That's not what you kind of hope for or wish for when you have a study, but that was the result of our study. And the journaling group outperformed the control group on at least a longer list of the outcomes. They were doing better than the control group on these aspects: negative affect, satisfaction with life, the perception that life is better now in recovery than it was in active addiction. They had less depression, less anxiety, and more satisfaction with the host treatment center. So mixed, but maybe a signal toward the journaling. And the other thing being that they found it more pleasurable and helpful. And we had this reactivity in the control group where some members of the control group got some benefit that was unintended. When we did a subgroup analysis of people with less than 90 days of recovery in our sample, we did find an effect of the journaling that was stronger than the effect for the total sample combined. So let me show you what we have here. We have the negative affect outcome on the left-hand side, which ranged from 10 to 50. And here, the blue line is the control group. The red line is the journaling group. And the x-axis is time baseline after the group phase, after the independent journaling phase. So during this period is when they were actively journaling. And then there was no study activity at all for a month, and then a follow-up. So we see that negative affect started to tip back up again for both groups. It's kind of interesting. For anxiety, again, journaling is the red. So we see lower anxiety for the journaling group, lower urges for drugs or alcohol from the journaling group, higher or at least on average, higher scores on a flourishing questionnaire, higher rates of confidence staying sober, higher rates of commitment to sobriety, less depression. And then even in this much smaller sample where there were 20 in each group, we actually reached statistically significant differences at some of the time waves. There were no statistically significant differences in the whole sample, but with just the subsample, it's surprising because it's a smaller sample size, but we still achieved statistical significance where the journaling group had significantly less depression after the month of journaling. They had significantly more feelings of happiness with recovery, significantly more strongly feeling that life in recovery was better than life during active addiction. And then our strongest effect was for satisfaction with life. So conclusions, participants found the journaling to be doable. They liked it. It was as easy as completing a survey, but more satisfying, helpful, and pleasant. The journaling might be most impactful for those who haven't yet begun using other recovery supportive practices, because perhaps those who have greater than 90 days sobriety were sort of already writing gratitude lists, and they already had a planner. This PRJ might furnish skills or put a tool in the hands of people very early in recovery when they're at that very vulnerable stage that give them a set of tools right away. They don't have to wait to develop those tools or practices over time as they naturally would occur, but they can right away have those tools in hand. And that I believe there is strong enough evidence here that we should continue this work and do another research study with a larger sample. So the next set of polls, if you will, and then I'll be done. What do you think of positive recovery journaling? We have 3 questions for you. Positive recovery journaling is appealing to me. You can tell us how you really feel. Okay, good. Okay, we have most people agreeing. That is super interesting to me. Let's see. And that is a measure, by the way, of acceptability, your feeling of positive recovery journaling as acceptable. Okay, and now we have 2 more like this. Positive recovery journaling seems applicable, whatever that might mean for you. Okay, with the majority saying that you agree, and that question is representative of what they would call appropriateness, your sense of positive recovery journaling being appropriate for what it's designed to do. And then one last question. Positive recovery journaling seems easy to use. What would you say? Okay, pretty much we're seeing the same kind of normal distribution around agree. Thank you very much. That is a measure of your sense of it as feasible, doable. Thank you for that. I want to mention that in my next research study, I'll be teaching providers how to use positive recovery journaling with your own clients. If this is of interest to you, there's a short Google form questionnaire that you can fill out at z.umn.edu/train-ppj. And I'll put that in the chat later. But if you think this might be of interest, where I would teach you how to use this journaling with your clients, and you would continue to give me feedback on what you think about it, then if you would be willing to fill out that short questionnaire, I'll reach out to you when the study is more ready. And you can always email me at any time with any questions you might have. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Amy. As I said, I love to incorporate this a lot. I do have a question just with that second study that you did. Did you ever just get random feedback from the treatment facilities? So, the study group had higher satisfaction with the treatment facility. Did they ever make comments on what they thought or what they saw?
We didn't formally ask providers what they felt about it, but we had a lot of interpersonal contact with the providers because we had a relationship with them. It was agreed upon in advance, and it was written informed consent that if anyone ever wrote something in their journal that worried us, we would let the counselor know. So we were in touch with the counselors, and my sense was that they felt good about the study and that they were excited for their clients to be part of it, and they wanted their clients to be part of it, and that they got good feedback. It was just anecdotal. It wasn't a formal research question. Mhm.
No, I love that.
My question would be this, is that I have to imagine that there's probably a difference between men and women as far as compliance, right? I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm a guy, but I feel like as a guy, I just never get this done. Is that a pretty accurate statement?
We thought that more women would be interested in the study than men, but we had 50% women and men. And we know that people with substance use disorders, it's more like 60% men, 40% women. So I guess that suggests an oversampling of women. Otherwise, we'd see 60-40. But we saw 50-50 basically. So everyone seemed to be getting their journaling done. I mean, there were some who dropped out for a wide range of reasons, but we didn't see a dropout vary by gender. It was nothing I especially noticed. I could run that and see, but it seemed to me, just from observation, not from empirical study or counting or analysis, that the men and the women were both very active in the group, and they got their journaling done. And the way we knew that is that every day when they finished their journaling, they took a picture of it and they uploaded it up to us in our survey, in our electronic survey. So
To piggyback on that question, any differences in ages? I mean, I know you said that between control group and whatever, that they were the same ages between the study groups, but in terms of the dropout, similar to the men and women question, any differences in ages?
it's a great question. I haven't explored that. I hadn't thought to have a look at that, but I'm curious now to run it and see.
If you were to look at these journals, and again, I don't know the total number of them, was there, and I think often in our clinics, we are surprised when people relapse, right? It's like you thought everything was going great. Is there anything that you have picked out of people's journaling that has suggested when you go forward here, they relapse? Anything that kind of it gives that hint that we should be doing something differently?
We did collect data from the treatment center on recurrence of substance use and reason for leaving treatment, like leaving on good terms and graduating or leaving on for other reasons. And we haven't looked at that data yet, partly because the treatment group was exposed to the journaling. They got a journal at the end of the study. So they were exposed to the journaling and they got instructions for how to use it. And we weren't sure if we were really going to be comparing two groups one that did get exposure and one that didn't get exposure. But again, you're giving me a good idea. Like if people wrote more, what we did look at is if people write more, they tend to have a more positive mood that day. So they tend to feel more positive affect and less negative affect. Then they'd be writing more than they average on average. Each person would write, some people write more, some people write less, but if they wrote more than their own average. But you're giving me some ideas of predictors of these negative outcomes that we could have seen in the journaling. Thank you for that neat idea.
How much did you do for follow-up once they got into outpatient or, like longer term follow-up, or is that something you're looking at? I just, in a treatment facility where they're inpatient and, they don't have as many outside things, how that kind of perpetuated into the outpatient, into kind of the real world situation, and what happened in terms of people continuing to journal and or along with the predictors, if there was, correlation with lapse or not.
In this study, we only looked at a 1 month follow-up, and we didn't ask people to continue journaling, but we didn't tell them to stop either. And most people stopped journaling. And we only had that 1 month follow-up. So that's all that we did for this particular study design.
There was a question in the chat about like where to get some of these journals. You talked about that they're pretty available at different stores, or, generally these are online, particular ones like you're developing. Are those also available?
The one I'm developing, I could give you a single page to print out for the single journaling page and a set of written instructions. If you want to email me, I would give those out to you. But we don't have like journal books commercially available now.
Yeah, just a couple of sheets that people could make copies of.
That's right. But in this next study I'm doing, where I'm teaching providers how to start their own journaling group, for them, they would get a box of journals for themselves and their clients, like a box of around 10 journals as built into being a participant in that next study. And those would be free.
Yeah, I'd volunteer for this, but you'd probably get like 2 pages back. I just couldn't get it done. I don't know. Sorry. So I won't bother you to getting any of these.
Okay.
I'd mess that all up for you. I'd skew all of your data. Any other questions for Amy that anybody else has before we let her go? A really fascinating talk. I find this so interesting. I think there's just so much information that probably can be gleaned from all of this.
How much, you mentioned that you had that kind of release to be able to talk back to the treatment facilities if there was anything you saw that was worrisome. Did you have any of that? Like, how often did you have to like maybe talk to a counselor?
It happened pretty regularly throughout the study. Maybe it wasn't only something they wrote in their journal. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was more a behavioral issue, maybe emails we were getting from the person that seemed like the person was having a hard time. Because we had a study email and participants could email us if they had any questions along the way, be in touch with us. So I'd say it was pretty regular, maybe twice a month. I was reaching out to a counselor and just sharing, this is what we're seeing, and in case it's helpful to the counselor's care.
No, I think that's important, especially as, from like a clinical side to kind of be aware of that, because, journals are supposed to be, in my opinion, more of the private side. And then, but if you're doing this as part of like a treatment plan, having that discussion with your patient or client about sharing that to be able to identify some of these things. You had that privilege of being able to see those to identify possible things before they happened.
That's a very interesting point about applications for practice. I wouldn't imagine that the counselor would see what the client had written, but when we journal in a group, if the counselor uses it in a group, we do read out what we've written. In my research study groups, I didn't have people read aloud their bad things list because our group was about teaching the journaling, and we didn't have the capacity to really help people with their bad things list. But of course, the people were already in treatment. They had counselors, they had people they could turn to for help with other serious matters, but the group wasn't equipped to do that. But we had them read out all their other answers, so we could hear a little bit about what people were writing.
So many different things here, Amy. I just have lots of thoughts. So no, I think this is so wonderful. And I'm glad that you're continuing these studies, because I think this is such a huge thing and, positive, whether it's the exact same structure of journal to continue, for someone going forward, or if that evolves into, more free writing or whatever it is, but such a good skill for coping or for whatever, any point in recovery or really any point in life too. So it's one of those life skills you inadvertently are teaching while trying to help with early recovery.
Yes, absolutely. I feel the same way. Well, thanks so much for having me. I think I see something in the chat.
I love that last thing from Melissa.
Yeah.
Using this prior to a use disorder starting, almost like prevention. Like if counselors are dealing with youth for anxiety, depression, or whatever else, to kind of try to use this to incorporate to prevent.
Absolutely. As a way of self-expression, of being able to notice and appreciate what's going well now, as a way of having a look at what's not going quite well, that maybe they could intervene or do something about. And again, to plan a day that's going to be fulfilling, balanced, and reinforcing. So really, it could be useful for anyone
Yeah, I think
to gain some positive insight. Yes, I agree.
I think you could do research until you're 100 based on
Plenty
ideas.
to explore on this topic.
Right.
All
Awesome.
right.
Well, thank you. Of course, like if you get another study done or if you evolve, that would be wonderful at some point to have you back. And I think your training and all of that is a great idea. And I love that people can email you. I put your email in the chat so people can email you to reach out if you guys want to get the printed version of the journal or, the sheets. So thank you,
very
Amy.
much. My pleasure. Nice to see everyone again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks again. And thanks for everybody for coming. And again, next week, I believe we have Isaac again next week.
Nope, there isn't one next week. 2 weeks.
Oh, 2 weeks. Yep. So next week, no echo. The week after, Isaac Marsler.